Colm, just start off broad strokes on Meath season this year. You're a coach with them. How do you think the season went overall, and do you think people are too quick to just look at the Leinster final and scoring 4 points when they're summing up how you've done?
Yeah, I think so. Like, that's kind of like your black mark for your season, where when we kind of assessed it, we were really pleased with the season. We set some goals out, Shane, and we achieved most of them. Leinster final, Super 8s were bonus material, and we seen them as opportunities to learn.
But when you come back to that Leinster final, we spoke earlier in the year about Dublin's setup on the Gaelic football show and off the ball, and you were looking at the way they work the kick-outs and what you would try and expose, what you're coming up against. When you face them in the Leinster final, is it very different in reality to how it is when you're in a studio trying to figure out what they're doing?
It is, yeah. It's real time, and one of the challenges as a coach is to coach in real time. Is to try to get some of them ideas from tactic boards and from flip charts and everything onto the pitch. So we would have worked a lot on certain things, and a lot of it worked out. Like when we went in at half time, the score was 4-1. So number one, we had kept Dublin to 4 points. Now obviously we were bitterly disappointed with the 1 point, but we genuinely felt that we had a chance of winning that game in the second half. And if my memory serves me right, Conor Callaghan scored the goal on the 67th minute, and then they put 4 points over. So they scored 1-17 against us, but 1-4 was in the last, was from 67 minutes on. So we kept them to 13 points really for the bulk of the game, which was a tremendous performance.
When you look at the shooting throughout that game, and there were a lot of missed opportunities for Meath, do you think any of that is down to just the pressure you put under by Dublin, and at times you're taking on the wrong shot because of even the perception that I must be under pressure, there must be someone right on my shoulder?
Yeah, well, there's loads of things, right? And again, in the environment of coaching, you have to put your hand up when you make mistakes, and we probably made a couple of mistakes. Like I look back on things like Ben's first free kick. Jack McCaffrey tied his lace in front of him for about 10 or 15 seconds, and the referee never moved him. Now that's fine, right? And again, I admire that sort of stuff, but it's not my job to move Jack McCaffrey. It's the referee's job to see that as a problem. Ben's last free, he told me a couple of days afterwards that his last free, he was after missing 2 now, so we were after, it was kind of, right, yeah, it was in everybody's mind that we weren't on hadn't got shooting boots on, but he looked up, he placed the free down, he looked up and he seen himself on the screen, and that kind of unnerved him a little, and he missed that. Now I felt then after, so we didn't do him service enough. We should have prepared him for that. We should have been telling him like the noise levels, that you're going to see these things, you're going to distraction. But in fairness, right, we weren't exposed to them ourselves. So now we have a new tool. Like next year we can advise fellas, like, this is what you're going to face. So again, yeah, it was in our mind, and you could see it. Like, I mean, fellas aren't stupid. They knew, like, when we hit the post 3 times, we had a miss here, we had a miss there. The confidence was dipping all the time, and that's something we have to learn from. You don't have to maybe try to get into the game that you got to get the next score. You got to compose yourself, whatever to do, just to keep the scoreboard ticking.
When we talked about the kickouts earlier in the year, it was something that was really on my mind when I was watching that game. And you were talking about trying to create pockets of space and hit them, and that's what Dublin tried to do, and maybe that concertina effect of everyone folds in and then goes out. And I thought to myself that the things that you were very much adamant about, for whatever reason, it just didn't seem like ye ever did that. It seemed like ye spread out into situations where Dublin, by playing zonal, had you kind of caught from every angle. Yeah. Did you feel like what you wanted to do and what you had planned to do, you just didn't do?
Well, it happened to a part. Like, I mean, see, again, when you're playing that type of football, and a lot of our lads were new to it, there was an emotional element to it. So when the emotional element takes over, you go back to type. So we probably hadn't got what we were worked on embedded enough. Like, it worked in patches, but it didn't work enough. Like, I remember in the second half, we seemed to just go predominantly long, where we had kind of worked on a lot, not going long. We had trying to had different alternatives, but we kind of just went back to sort of type. Now that just shows you that what we were working on, we wasn't embedded. So again, as I said to you earlier on, like, sometimes you make mistakes in coaching, and as long as you acknowledge it and you spot it, it's fine, and try to rectify it. Like, but if we keep going back, we'll get the same result.
Yeah, because everyone has a plan until they get smacked in the mouth type thing. And speaking of that sort of terminology, after the game, a journalist asked Andy McEntee about would club players or county players be available for club hurling, and he had a very emotive reaction and very colourful language towards him. I thought, as a journalist, of course, I'm going to be on the journalist side, because the guy is doing his job. He probably doesn't have too many opportunities to even ask Andy about these things. And if I'm working in a bank and someone comes in and they ask for a loan and they say no, and then they're going to kind of use colourful language with me, I don't think that's fair. And I don't think it's fair either way. So what was your thought on it?
Oh, well, I'd be like again as a coach and manager, whatever. I'd be in Andy's camp here. I thought it was an unfair question, and I thought the timing of it was unfair. Like, I mean, it was right at the end of the interview. Like, Andy was doing his press obligations, and he had answered some difficult questions from lots of different journalists from different backgrounds, and that was near the end, the last question. And to me, it felt like a setup, and I just thought the question, they knew that Andy would kind of react in some kind of way, and like, I think they were nearly going after that. I felt it was a setup. I probably would have reacted the same way, because look, it was very difficult, and it was very, very honest and brave of Andy to go out and face the music and try to be as honest as possible about the performance, and not being like, we could put all the spin you want on it, but we only scored 4 points. So again, you had to face them. There were going to be some difficult questions, but that was kind of like a curveball. Caught him completely off guard, and he's an emotional fella, and I think like like, I don't blame him. I probably would have reacted the same, in fairness.
The way I see it, reminds me of a quote that Davy Fitzgerald gave in 2014. I think it was the start of a new season, a Waterford Crystal game or whatever it was called at the time. And someone had put it to him that TJ Ryan, who was then Limerick manager, had been complaining about third man tackles or something to do with that, blocking players off in a ruck. And he said, "Welcome to the big leagues, TJ." And to me, it's kind of like that. This is the big league. You're going to be asked the tough questions. You're going to have to be composed no matter what. And I think at the end of it, that journalist deserves an apology, but you probably don't see it that way.
No, I wouldn't see it that way either, because as I said to you, like before we started chatting, like managers and coaches are trying to fulfill their obligations, and it's hard at times, and you're trying to say the right thing, and you're trying to make sure that you don't give anything away, and you're trying to entertain the lads, because it's your obligations, and we need to get the word out. We need to be talking about the games. I just thought it was completely left field. Like, it was like a blindside hit. Like, if he felt that way inclined about the availability of the Meath players to play hurling, it possibly could have been asked off air. There was nothing to stop that man asking him as he got on the bus, "Come here, Andy, do you mind if I ask you, would you allow the players?" Like, but to ask in front of a press conference, a press room, like, I just thought it was a setup. I just wouldn't. I'd be in Andy's camp in this one now.
Okay, well, let's move on from post-Leinster final. You needed that reaction. You end up playing Clare in a round 4 qualifier. You win that game. You go into the Super 8s. Can you talk to me about the period after the Leinster final? How do you pick up the players, and what was the response?
Okay, well, look, again, it's fascinating for me. Like, I mean, we're having a great time getting to know new people and getting to know new players and backroom teams or whatever. So we sat down and we came up with a bit of a strategy, and we took a left field strategy that you might find interesting. On our first night back in Park Talton, I asked Mick, the liaison officer, I said, "Mick, will you do me a favour?" And I said, "Will you ask the guys to bring all their kit bags out onto the pitch? Let on there's treatment going on in the dressing room or something." So all the players took the kit bags out onto the pitch, and we done a warm-up. When the warm-up was finished, I called them in and I asked them to put all the kit bags on their back. And we done our first activity. We done a possession game with all the kit bags in the back. Now, it was great fun, because some of the older fellas thought something was coming down the line, so they started emptying their kit bags, getting the weight out of the kit bags. Okay, some of the intelligent fellas kind of picked up what we were doing. So we played 2 minutes of a game with their kit bags on their back, and then I just said to them, "Lads, ditch the baggage and let's move on." So what we were trying to do is put a practical exercise on what had just happened, and we were trying to put something tangible that, to everybody was kind of going, you were going to have your psychologists in talking about moving on at this, that and the other, but we were putting something physical, practical and tangible. Now, we had a great crack after it, like when we were saying fellas taking the boots out of it and all the wash gear out with the light in the bag, but it certainly got the message across, and the mood lifted completely after that.
And so straight away was the Dublin game gone, and the miasma that was hanging around after that?
No, not gone, because look, this might sound a little bit cheesy, but David Allred, now one of the top coaches in the rugby and golf world, just talking about positives, ignore the negatives. Like he said, you should not even mention any negatives, and I'm a big believer in that. So it was very difficult not to mention the negatives, but we had to distract the positives from that game, which were many. Like, I mean, we worked on a lot of stuff, like, for instance, talking about Kerry and Dublin, like, one of the things, 76% of Dublin scores come from hitting their inside forward line. So we had worked an awful lot on the ball not sticking, and we got great joy out of that. So the reason the ball can't stick is because if it doesn't stick, it becomes a dogfight to win the second ball. If it sticks, the man that wins it can either take on his man, or offload to the man on the loop, or offload to the runner in, and they're in control of the destiny of the ball then. But if the ball doesn't stick, it's a dogfight between the half back and the half forward, So little things like that. So we could point that out to the players. That worked a dream, and that's why we did it, right? So there was many other things like that we could point out to the players. Obviously, we'd had to point out to the 10 or 12 wides and that we missed, and we said that's one area we need we need to work on. Now, I do a little coaching in my club and stuff like that. And one day we were doing a coaching session with the club, and the penny sort of dropped on me one day. They were after playing a couple of heavy matches, so we decided just to have a light session. So we decided just to spend an hour doing shooting circuits. So we must have took about 400 shots each that night. And then I was thinking to myself, like, you're good at what you do, so do we practice enough shooting and training? You know, that sort of stuff. So again, you're always learning, you're always thinking, and you're always kind of assessing your role and in the performance. And you know, so certainly from that point of view, we said, right, we got to add more and more, and coach the shoot, and coach like the difference between a hard foot and a floppy foot, stuff like this. You know, when to shoot, what's your distance, where your zone. I know you might think that should be done, but there's an expectation level that players know all this, and maybe we just kind of expected that they did, you know.
Yeah. And then when you, like, the Clare game was a bit of a shootout down in Portlaoise. I was at that game, very exciting. And then you get into the Super 8s. Like, can you talk to me how you felt you performed across those games? Because it was the first time in the Super 8s. You probably haven't had exposure to, we'll call them Division 1 type teams that much in the past couple of years, or certainly as a management team. So how do you think you performed?
Well, we certainly, like, I mean, we can't deny that. Like, for 60 minutes, 62, 63 minutes of the 3 Super 8 games, we were very much in the games. But for some reason, we didn't finish as strongly as we would have hoped. So one of the things that stands out to me, and we've been speaking for this already, is our first match was Offaly, and then we played Carlow, and then we played Laois, and then we played Dublin, and then we played Clare, and then we had the 3 Super 8 games. So we had 8 championship matches in total, but 4 of them were against Division 1 teams. The 4 Division 1 teams bought and sold us when it came to the dark arts and all the other bits, where the teams, the other 4 teams, they weren't engaging in them. So that was the first thing, where we had to wise up very, very quickly. But you'll only learn that, like as I said earlier on, we were writing checks, right, but we hadn't experienced to cash them. So we didn't know, we were trying these things, and they were kind of they were ahead of us.
But what are the sort of dark arts you're talking about? I'm not asking you to single out players or teams, but what are we talking about here?
Well, you're talking about how the top teams manage their games, from getting their Marifanias on, filling spaces to slowed kickouts, from blocking runs from deep from cornerbacks and halfbacks, for taking not third man tackles but running in the paths the players have to change, from getting the referee on their side. Like Dublin, for instance, like, I mean, every time there's a stoppage play, there's 2 or 3 Dublin players around a referee asking him a question with the language like, do you mind if I ask you this question? Or would you mind telling me what I did wrong there, just for my own game, right? And what they're doing is they're getting all them on their sides. Now, we weren't doing any of that sort of stuff. And another thing that I noticed was, when we played all them top teams, all the officials know the players' names, but they didn't know the Meath players' names. So they were saying, Meath number 7, wait till I give you the whistle, or Leroy, you can go ahead now, or Jack, you can go ahead now, and stuff like that. And that was a massive difference. Now, that's probably only natural because they're well known. So what we needed to do is we need to embrace as many of them as possible. And there's 2 ways of looking at it, Shane. You have to be, number 1, engage your own ones, and number 2, expect what they're going to do.
And did you find then that when it came down to the last 10 minutes of these games, and like the Donegal game comes to mind especially, that was the first game, if I'm correct. Yeah, that you're right in that game, you're playing well. Is it a case of, is it white line fever mentally, or is it like our players are not physically conditioned to that level just yet, whereas Donegal, etc., they're all used to playing Division 1 teams and having to go to the well for 76, 80 minutes even? Yeah,
I wouldn't say it's conditioning, because we were conditioned really, really well, and like all our stats prove that. But it might be the other thing, as you say, it might be kind of the mental. They know how to close a game out. Their game management in the last 10 minutes has been honed over years of playing these top teams. Plus, it's a 20-man game now. Now, where we have a really, really good panel, when we have to go down to the sort of the 16, 17 and 18, you're bringing on really good players, but they haven't got the experience that the Donegal bench has, or the Dublin bench has. But again, the only way you'll get that is playing these teams, you know.
And one thing that stood out for me is someone like Thomas O'Reilly. He came on against Clare, and I think he missed a free, and he might have missed one other shot, and he was taken straight back out. But in the Super 8s we saw him back in again, young player, bouncing back. Is it very difficult for a management team to sort of say to a player, look, that happened, you were taken off quickly after coming on, but we still trust you?
Oh, without doubt. And see, that's the best way to manage young players, really, is with young players you have to put them in and put them out. Okay, it's all right, like for Con or Callan and a few others, but they are the exception to the rule. The majority of young players have to be brought in at times, and they have to be taken out, and you have to explain to them, like, look, why we did it, and you know, because sometimes if a young player makes a mistake, the chances are he might make another mistake and whatever, so you're better off just kind of taking them out and explain that to them. But then you're showing the confidence you have in them by putting them back in, and saying, look, this journey doesn't go in straight straight lines. There's going to be peaks and valleys in it, and once they have the mentality to stick at it and know that they have the trust behind the management, they'll keep at it.
Yeah. And when you come away from the season, are you thinking we've got more players that are now playing at the level of Donald Keoghan, of Mickey Newman, of Killian O'Sullivan?
Yeah, absolutely. And even by training with them, our training was really good this year in terms of fellas bought into it. And look, we keep drilling into them. The difference between the top teams and us at the moment is the intensity in how they train and prepare, right? And that fellas are understanding that, and they're seeing that now after these 3 Super 8 matches and the Dublin matches. They see that, they really see that. So again, you can always learn lots from that. But them guys that you mentioned are the leaders in the team, and are tremendous guys, and they're bringing on them young fellas, and them young fellas are aspiring to get up to their level.
And a final question: what's the expectation for Meath in the next year or so? Where do you need to get to for next year to suggest progression?
Well, I think the first thing is that has to be acknowledged. Like, Meath are putting great work in behind the scenes, and they have a pathway now for the young players, and the pathway is kind of proven as successful because some of their underage teams are doing quite well, and they're looking at the big picture. They're not looking at immediate success. They're looking at kind of down the line. So the success for us would be to get 3 or 4 more younger players in. Be competitive in Division 1, be competitive again in Leinster, and again if you can kind of mirror what we did this year in terms of holding your Division 1 status, getting to a Leinster final or getting as close to them, that would be a major success. But be in the sort of, let's call it the top 10. If you can stay within that, that's progress.